In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston, our usual cast of characters here on what should be a busy show. We'll talk Memphis Tigers football with Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian, Frank Bonner, and then we'll switch things off, talk a little Tigers basketball as their season is underway with the Daily Memphian Tigers basketball beat writer, Parth Upadhyaya. And Frank, it's never a dull moment with the Tigers. This one didn't go down to the final moments where the Tigers had to pull out a last-minute drive, but a late score by USF and a two-point conversion made it respectable, but a crazy game. If you like scoring, you like that one. 59-50 as the Tigers improved to 7-2 and 4-1 in the conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lead to that game story was that they were playing on Saturday like defense was going out of style. I mean, for the first three quarters, I mean, it was all offense. And on one end, the offense looked like it's clicking, right? It looks like they're reaching their peak at the right moment. But on the other end, the defense looked like it's trending downward in a lot of ways. And so I don't know how you get both of those to, like, if the defense can play the way that they played to start the year and the offense can continue what they're going, then you like your chances. Or just take that fourth quarter, wrap it up in a bottle, and do that for the next, 8 quarters of the next two games or whatever.
Of course, the early games, Bethune-Cookman, Arkansas State, they played teams that really struggled offensively. Now, Arkansas State has figured it out since. They've now won 5 games. They have a new quarterback, but it was a different quarterback when they played Memphis. So certainly the Memphis defense took advantage of pretty much anemic offenses. The offenses they're playing now in the conference are strong. Defensively is a whole other story. And like you said, Frank, that's the same, unfortunately, with Memphis. When you talk to Matt Barnes, the defensive coordinator, when you talk to some of these players, do they pinpoint any areas? Why do you think it is that they are struggling? Is it personnel? Is it scheme? Or is it just offenses are better than defenses?
One thing that Matt Barnes has said, just the way that college football is, he said it's when you're playing in a conference where offenses are a little bit more explosive or whatever, holding teams to a touchdown or two just isn't necessarily as realistic as fans may want to believe. But then on the other end, he talked about just the tackling needs to be better. Ryan Silverfield kind of broke down a couple of those drives. He said there were, I think he said like 2 or 3 missed opportunities in terms of like that could have been turnovers or whatever.
There was the one with Barnett that had the interception.
Right, and he said on all those missed opportunities, USF went down and scored on those drives. So if you take advantage of those opportunities, then you take points off the board that eventually, led to some touchdowns. And so I think just the timeliness of execution is part of it.
Yeah, and then you had those 2 stops in the fourth quarter when they were able to stymie the USF offense. I don't know where that came from, but they stepped up. And we have seen that defense from time to time certainly step up. But you're right, Frank. You've got to take advantage of situations where you have a ball in your hands for an interception. You weren't able to bring it in. How about that Tulane game on that one drive?
Yeah.
Tulane able to rally to win. Memphis had 3 opportunities to get an interception on the one drive, and they weren't able to hang on to the ball. So certainly you have to seize the moment. But it just felt like from the get-go of this particular game against USF that it was score every time you got the ball and just outscore your opponent, which basically is what happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened. And look, the defense had a tough day. But, tip your hat off to those players who, in that fourth quarter, they did play with some pride on that defense, right? They made some stops that allowed the offense to continue to do what they were doing and prevent USF from keeping up. And so they did show some grit in those final 12 minutes of the game to help seal the deal. You just got to be able to start the game and end the game the same way.
And again, I understand how porous the USF defense is, but against the rush, they're pretty good. And they, for the most part, took Blake Watson out of the game. He was able to bust one and get a touchdown run. But for the most part, they stymied the Memphis running game. So that made it one-dimensional. But Memphis was able to move the ball at will through the air. Easily Seth Henigan's best game of the season, would you agree?
Yeah, which is crazy because the North Texas game was the best game of the season, I felt, for Seth. And then he turns around and has another best game of the season.
So he's getting better as the game progresses, the season.
Right. And so you like the fact that he's playing his best football when it matters most, right? I mean, anytime you hear back-to-back weeks where folks are saying the quarterback played his best game of the season, if you're Tim Cramsey, that offensive coordinator, you like where that offense is headed.
So you have that going, and then Seth gets knocked out of the game, and you have the folk hero moment of the local Memphian product, Tevin Carter, big arm, big guy, stepping in, doing all the right things and biding his time until he gets his opportunity eventually at the University of Memphis, not looking at the portal, looking to stay, play for the hometown team. Comes into the game. Interesting play call. I probably would have just handed it off. Tim Cramsey calls for the quick pass, the out to Rock Taylor, who turns a 5-yard out into an 85-yard touchdown pass and run. And you just felt great for Tevin Carter because that was the one that pretty much sealed the deal. And then Tevin would end up coming back into the game when Seth couldn't go and finish it off for Memphis. You feel really good for a young man like Tevin Carter.
Yeah, and also you feel good about the fact that he made the right read because that was a run pass option, right? And so originally, Ryan even talked about it on the sideline. He said he was just talking to, telling himself, just hand the ball off. He was hoping, and then Tevin, he said when the cornerback backed off a rock, he held it and he knew he made the right read. And so even in a moment like that with, it was still only a 3-point game. A lot of still riding, on that drive for him to, the moment wasn't too big. He didn't hand the ball off just because he felt that's what he was supposed to do. He made his read, he delivered, and then Rock Taylor did what he did to make Tevin look like the unsung hero.
Okay, so for a game that ended up in the Tigers' favor, the improved record to 7-2 and 4-1 in conference play, there's obviously a cloud of uncertainty. And that's with the status of Seth Henigan for this game against Charlotte on Saturday, which will be a 1 o'clock Eastern time kick, so a noon kickoff here in Memphis. But not only Seth Henigan, Blake Watson, who you can argue is the best running back in the conference, he also went out late in the game. On Monday, during his press conference, Ryan Silverfield said both players were day-to-day. You and I both saw Seth Henigan. He was getting a massage right there in the indoor facility where we do the interview. Did not see Blake Watson. Have you heard anything more? They are very quiet, and they're going to be very quiet, close to the vest with injuries. But what else do we have as far as the injury status, the health status of two key players for Memphis?
Yeah, obviously, like you said, Silverfield is always close to the vest with injuries. But there are two things that stick out to me as far as Seth's status. For one, the fact that he did come back in the game after initially leaving, I think is a good sign. And two, although Ryan didn't give us anything concrete, one of the things he did say is he expects Seth to be back sooner than later. And so those two things combined lead me to believe that Seth is probably closer to playing than not playing.
Frank, what's interesting, you made the point about coming back into the game. So he comes back into the game. It was unfortunately a 3-and-out. He threw the ball 3 times. And it did not seem like he was straining with his throw because, remember, the injury appears to be nothing official from the school, but it's a left shoulder. It's his non-throwing arm. And the strength was there. He threw one behind. I think it may have been skates, and they ended up having to punt it away. But then he didn't return. So the question is, did he not return because they saw something or Seth said something, or did they feel the game was in hand, let Tevin finish it up, we'll rest Seth, no need to get him hit again?
My guess is that, because even after the post game, the comment, I'm paraphrasing, because he talked about Seth being a competitor and everything, but he said that, Seth wasn't going to continue to play at the detriment of the team, right? If he felt he wasn't able to perform at his complete level. So, my guess is that in the initial injury, like on that day, there was probably some pain still there that, he may not have been able to go, but after the fact that he goes back in leads me to believe there wasn't anything major structurally going on. Otherwise, they would have been able to figure that out. I think it may have been a pain threshold thing. And if that's the case, you have an entire week to work through that pain threshold situation, which would lead me to believe that he could be ready. Now, that doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be 100% against Charlotte, but good enough to where he would be able to play. I haven't been told this. All this is obviously speculation, but that would be my guess.
I'm with you. I agree with what you said, and again, speculation on my part as well. But if there was the possibility of structural damage, they're not putting him back in the game. They put him right back into the game. Then they pulled him out of the game. So that makes me think that it's also a pain tolerance situation. Now, I believe, because I'm right there on the sideline watching him, he wanted to get back into that game. He was angry to not be in that game, but I think it was a smart move to run with Tevin for the rest of the game. Now, here's a question for you. They're playing Charlotte. Charlotte has gotten better. They've won 2 out of their last 3 games, both road games in conference play, including a road game in overtime last week against Tulsa. But they're not near the top tier of the conference. Is there a possibility that Seth could go, but maybe they hold him back because they're not playing SMU, which they'll play the following week, or Tulane, UTSA? Or do you think that if they feel he's ready to go and can play through pain, and this again is all speculation, we don't know if there's anything more serious than just pain, that they would play him? I'm trying to ask you to get into the mind here of Coach Silverfield.
I think you're playing with fire. I mean, you're playing with fire either way, right? But I think if you feel like Seth is in a situation where he's not 100% but good enough to play, and you decide to not play him, you're playing with fire there, because we can talk about how good or how not good Charlotte is all day long, but UAB wasn't top tier of the conference. North Texas wasn't necessarily top tier of the conference, and they needed,
and the season implodes, right? If they lose to Charlotte,
right? I mean, they needed a drive in the last 47 seconds to beat North Texas, and North Texas isn't Tulane or SMU. Yeah. So the point I'm making is that these last few weeks, games have been close, and you're playing with fire if you get yourself into another close game and you don't have your starting quarterback, and you could have played him if you needed to. Now, obviously, they're going to be smart. They're Silverfield and that medical staff, they're never going to put a player in danger to win a football game. So if he's not ready to play, he just won't play. But I feel like if they do think he's well enough to play, they're going to play him. They're not going to be looking ahead at SMU trying to hold him for that week, because they know they have to win now.
Look, they talk about how confident they are in Tevin Carter, and I'm sure they are, but Tevin has not played much in his young career. So you're still, as you talked about, you're playing with fire, that this guy's ready to step up, go 4 quarters, and win you a football game on the road. We don't know, you and I don't know much about him, because we haven't seen much of Tevin Carter other than in spring ball or in a few practices that we've been able to see him. But as far as the running game, we know much more about that. We know how important Blake Watson is. But do you feel confident enough, if Blake can't go, and I have no idea what his injury is, that with Sutton Smith, with Brandon Thomas, maybe Hargrove or Ducker, who's, I think, going to be redshirted, I'm not sure about his situation. Do you feel confident enough that they have enough in the running game without Watson?
I do. Not to say that it's going to necessarily be as explosive as Watson was or whatever, but
hard to be, right?
But Sutton Smith, he has an explosive skill set. I know we haven't seen it at the level that we thought we would, because Blake has been, so incredible. But I do think that, like you said, Charlotte isn't one of the best teams in the country type of situation. I do think that Sutton Smith is capable of shouldering that load if he needs to.
Yeah, it's just right now there's just too many unanswered questions as we get ready for this game on Saturday about the health situation of Henigen and Watson, and really what the philosophy is going to be of this coaching staff. They understand, we understand how important this football game is. You don't want to get into a situation where you come up short and it makes that SMU game not as important as what it should be, because we are leading down the road, Memphis and SMU is, to a titanic matchup a week from Saturday, and that's going to be an 11 a.m. kickoff at Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. But it's really all for naught if they lose this football game.
Yeah, which is why, to your point about deciding to rest Seth, if you think he's a go but you want to hold him, you can't get caught looking ahead because this is the ultimate trap game. If you're Memphis, right? This is a game where Charlotte is obviously going to get up for this one, right? And you have to match that energy, especially like you said, they won 2 out of 3. They have a rejuvenated confidence about themselves. You're going against a team that is probably the most confident it has been all year. That's a dangerous situation if you get caught looking ahead.
Teams don't like to look ahead, but we like to look ahead.
Always.
So let's look ahead. What is the prospects right now? What does Memphis have to do, and what type of help do they need to get a rematch, more than likely, against Tulane?
Well, so obviously nothing happens if Memphis doesn't win out. And if they win out, that means they beat SMU. So SMU is knocked out of the tiebreaker because they have the head-to-head. So then you have Tulane, who's currently undefeated in the conference right now. UTSA is currently undefeated in the conference right now. They play each other in the season finale. The best scenario is for Tulane to beat UTSA because then UTSA has 1 loss. Memphis would have 1 loss, but Memphis would be ranked higher than UTSA, like in the college football playoff rankings. And then if nobody's ranked in the college football playoff rankings, my explanation, it goes to like a computer system thing or whatever, and Memphis would be ahead of UTSA because UTSA started the season 1-3.
That's right.
And so that would create another rematch between Tulane and Memphis, and obviously that game would be played in New Orleans. Now, if UTSA beats Tulane, then Memphis is out because UTSA would be undefeated, so they would host. Tulane would have 1 loss, and they would win the tiebreaker against Memphis. So Memphis needs to win out. And this is assuming that Tulane and UTSA don't lose a game before they meet.
Exactly.
Like if that happens, then obviously situations change. But my assumption is that both of those teams, when they meet, are still going to be undefeated in the conference.
Right. So Memphis does not control its own destiny. They're going to need a little help. They have to win all their games. They need help from UTSA. And let's get a little crazier.
Well, they need help from Tulane.
From Tulane to beat UTSA. Excuse me. And let's get a little crazier. Air Force loses somehow to Army, which will join the American football only next season. I don't know how that happened. And it was out in Colorado Springs, correct?
Yeah, I don't.
Is it Colorado Springs? Is that where they play, Air Force or Pro, wherever it's at?
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know how. I looked at the score. It was 20-0 at one point. I don't know how that happened.
I don't either. That was the biggest surprise of the weekend for me in college football. I think it's not Pro. That's BYU. But either way, they lost 23-3 to Army. So that's going to take them out of the mix. That Mountain West is going to be out of the mix. So there's a chance. Again, we're getting crazy here. Memphis wins the rest of their games. Tulane knocks off UTSA. Memphis beats Tulane in the conference championship game. And they could possibly be in the Fiesta Bowl.
Crazy, right?
Crazy, but it's still – look, we're inching closer to the end of the season.
It's
not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, this isn't when you're 6 games into the season, all this stuff is a little too far down the line.
Right.
Well, when you're 3 games away from the end of the regular season, I mean this is in the grasp, to your point. And the best thing that happened for the American is for that Air Force loss, because I'm not sure that any American team would have jumped Air Force if it wasn't Tulane. Like Tulane still would have got in over Air Force, I think. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, any other conference champion would not have gotten that group of 5 if Air Force had won out.
So if Memphis takes care of business, if SMU takes care of business, those two will meet a week from Saturday. They're meeting either way, but it will be a titanic matchup. There was 32,000 and change for the game against USF. I thought it was a really good crowd on a beautiful weather day. What do you think we're looking at if these two teams take care of business? Obviously, the Memphis side is what's important. It's a home game for Memphis. What are we looking at with crowd support if Memphis goes in to the SMU game 8-2, 5-1 in the conference, with still all their goals ahead of them?
Hold on, can you repeat that?
Yeah. What are we looking at crowd-wise?
Oh, crowd-wise. I think the 11 a.m. kickoff probably drops it down probably about 300 fans, right? I think a 2 p.m. kickoff would have gotten you an additional 300-400 fans.
You think it's too early for people?
But I do think it'll be the biggest crowd of the year. If assuming Memphis takes care of business against Charlotte, because that game will have so much riding on it in terms of conference championship implications. You got to feel that Memphis fans in the city will want to go see that game, especially looking at the way the offense has played these last few weeks. Folks have talked about, in previous years, they want to see the offense score a lot of points. They want to see this. Well, they scored 59 points. The week before that, they scored 45. The week before that against UAB, they put up a bunch of points. And so that coupled with the conference championship implications, last week was 32 and some change. I think this week could push, between 34, 35.
Yeah. Next week.
Next week. 34, 35. I could see it reach somewhere around that 35,000 mark.
Yeah, I'm with him. I shouldn't have second-guessed myself. Colorado Springs is the home of the Air Force Academy. All right, Frank, I will see you in Charlotte. Looking forward to it, and we'll see what happens as far as the health of the Tigers is concerned. Of course, Frank, we'll have you covered here at the Daily Memphian with all things Memphis Tigers football. Thank you, Frank.
All right, always a good time.
From football to basketball, and the round ball season is underway. Got underway on Monday night all around the nation, including here in Memphis, as the Memphis Tigers open up the 23-24 campaign with a 94-77 win over Jackson State. And it's time to talk some Tigers hoops with the Daily Memphian Tigers basketball beat writer Parth Upadhyaya. Parth, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I saw you before the game. You had a big smile on your face. We were talking. You were excited. Fans were excited. I'm sure the players were excited.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, man. College basketball is back.
It was a wild night Monday night with all the games around the nation. You saw the number 4 ranked Michigan State Spartans fall to James Madison. Just some craziness. But Memphis did not get bitten by the upset bug. They took care of business against Jackson State. It was tight early. I expected it to go that way. I think there's going to be some early season, I don't want to call them issues, but certainly there's going to be some blemishes. It's not going to be perfect. They're trying to find right combinations. But just looking at that team from top to bottom, you talk about the depth of talent, Parth. My gosh, it was on display.
It certainly was. And I think, I don't know, Greg, I'd call them issues, man. Like, that looked concerning for most of that first half. They turned the ball over, I think it was 10 times in the first
early,
8 minutes.
Right.
That's
16 for the game.
16 for the game. They missed a bunch of free throws again. They were out-rebounded by a team that played one player taller than 6'7". One. You know how many Memphis played? 5. 5 of those players Memphis played taller than 6'7". There's no excuse for that.
Yeah, we'll get to that rebounding problem because I could say that's a problem. We saw it in the 2 preseason games.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably the reason why, even though Jordan Brown is a guy who averaged nearly a double-double at Louisiana last year, but I think that's probably why he didn't start, that they wanted more motor, and they thought that Malco would provide that. It was interesting. Caleb Mills did not start, but he ended up leading the team with 7 rebounds. What's going to be important is guys that have that motor going 100% of the time, that crash the boards, that don't take anything for granted are going to be the guys that are playing and especially playing in crunch time.
No, for sure. And like you just alluded to, Penny threw us for a loop, and he wasn't even coaching, of course. He was suspended for the first game of his 3-game suspension. But, all of a sudden, 30 minutes prior to tip-off, we find out there's been a giant shakeup in the starting lineup with Malcolm Dandridge and Nick Jourdain being inserted into the mix. I saw Gary Parrish tweet out that this is the 6th straight year that a kid from East High that played for Penny isn't that starting 5. And obviously, Twitter had a field day with the jokes there. But man, I think what you said is spot on about Jordan Brown. Penny told me in August that he wanted Jordan Brown when they were in the DR to lose 15 or 20 pounds leading up to this season. And this is just me speculating, assuming. I don't know if he's done that, right? Like, he still looks to be laboring up and down the court. Still looks to be not fully engaged, not fully trying. And, everything we've heard about Malcolm Dandridge this offseason has been positive, that he's been, kicking butt and, been dialed in fully. So I think that kind of explains it. Maybe it's to light a fire under Jordan Brown. Say, hey, look at Malco.
let's take a look at the issues. Let's talk about
Sure.
the issues. Okay, you had the turnovers. I kind of look at this as they were so excited to get on the court in front of the fans. So many of them are newcomers, everyone but Jaden Hardaway and Malcolm Dandridge. So first time playing a game at FedExForum, regular season game. Obviously, they
Right.
played the exhibition games. I think they were over amped up, and that's why you had guys like David Jones, 5
Oh my
turnovers, right? Quinterly was turning the ball over. Jaquan Walton, who had a great first half scoring the ball, he turned the ball over a bunch. I just think they were overly excited. I expect the turnover numbers to go down. They have to go down when you play better competition. But I would chalk that one up to just the overexcitement of the first game.
I think so. And I think, Jaquan Walton kind of said that, right? Like he said that, they were overstimulated, so to speak.
Oh, did he say that? Okay.
Yeah. I asked him about it in the post-game presser, and he basically said, it was a lot of hype. It was a lot of adrenaline going into those first couple minutes. And when the game slowed down, so did they, right? Like once the game kind of got settled in, they did as well. But man, I think the concern is because it's been a trend, and it's small sample size, 2 exhibitions and 1 real game. But to see that continue, that's my concern, because the exhibition, there's barely anybody in the stands. You're playing a D2 opponent. There shouldn't be that excuse then, right? Like about the overstimulation. But to see that kind of same thing continue, where they had 19 turnovers against Lemoyne Oven on Thursday, and then to have 16 again, I think it's a small pattern, but a pattern nonetheless that is concerning.
Well, I hear what you're saying. And next week when we do the podcast, we'll have much more ammunition to really dissect it, because the game at Missouri.
Larger sample size.
Yes. And also the caliber of competition that they'll be playing. So we'll have a lot more to say then. But addressing the rebounding, which is more of the issue that I'm concerned with, because that's effort. That's effort. When smaller guys are out rebounding you, that is effort. And he's going to play the guys who are going to give maximum effort. And at times last night, or Monday night, we didn't see it. We just didn't see it from certain guys. And there is no reason why this Memphis team, with the length that they have, shouldn't be out rebounding just about every one of their opponents.
No, and there's no reason why, Malcolm Dandridge, I'll point to him, right? Played 17 minutes, got the start, got 3 rebounds, man. 3 rebounds in 17 minutes. Now, 17 minutes isn't a ginormous amount of time, but, dude, you're 6'9", whatever, 240, going up against guys who are much smaller, much less athletic. Like, you should be grabbing more than 3 boards. Same thing with Jordan Brown. I think he had 5 rebounds in 21 minutes. Those aren't great numbers. And, we kind of saw the same things, especially on the offensive glass in the first 2 exhibitions.
Yeah, you don't want to give up the second chance opportunities. No. That's how you can get burned. Now, we sound like we're negative Nellies here.
Be honest.
But there's a lot of positive that we saw.
Sure.
And they can score the basketball. There is no question about it. They had 10 different guys who scored at least a point. They can shoot the ball rather well. They shot extremely well from 3, a little bit under 40%. I think that trend will continue. They have a lot more options to shoot the 3, certainly than last year's team.
Right.
So from an offensive standpoint, who stood out to you?
I think Jaquan Walton obviously is the easy name that comes to mind, man. The guy opens his 23-24 season by trying to kill somebody, right? Like trying to posterize this poor Jackson State defender, man.
I'm trying to give the lineups on the floor for the broadcast on ESPN Plus, and he's trying to go down the lane, as you said, and erase somebody.
Man, and it wasn't just that though, right? He came out with that energy and he kind of sustained it. He had 15 points in the first 8 minutes of the game, which is absurd. Obviously, he cooled off later on, took less shots, but just to see a guy like that get hot, and to see, this game wasn't his best effort for David Jones, but to see David Jones do what he did in the second exhibition, it kind of shows you that, hey, it can be. There's 3 or 4 guys in that mix that it can be their night. They can lead the charge offensively on any given game.
What did you think of Quinterly running the show? Veteran point guard, comes from Alabama. He's been nursing an injury.
I don't think he looked like he had his legs under him. Again, second straight game, man. 8 points, 2 of 7 from the floor. And I think, the shooting is one thing, right? Like he shot 4 threes, made 1 fine. Like you're not going to hit every shot, and, that can kind of come together later. But to see, I think the 3 turnovers again after having 4 in that second exhibition, that's concerning to me. And to kind of see him, from what I could tell, not fully dialed in, not fully engaged, also a sign of concern.
So Rick Stansbury goes ahead and he slides Caleb Mills over for a good portion of the game at the point. We saw that in the exhibitions. That's what Penny wanted. That's what Penny did. But when I keep looking at the situation and I see what that young man from UCF can do, and Jalen Young, I'm thinking to myself, why not play Caleb just at his natural 2?
Right.
And when Quinterly needs a spell, that's when you bring in Young, because he's a change. Not that Quinterly's slow, but Young is so fast. He's a change of pace guy. And he was guarding their little guard, who did a lot of damage at 16 points, that he was guarding him, nose to nose.
Relatively well. Yes.
That was quick on quick. So what do you think about when they take JQ out? Would you rather see Mills running the point, or would you rather see Jalen Young? Not that it's your choice, Parth, but what would you rather do?
I think at this point, I'm right with you, man. I think I'd rather see Jalen Young, but I think even with Young or Mills, we haven't really seen them play make too much, right? Like we haven't really seen them create for others.
Again, small sample size.
Young, the thing that stands out to me is just the defensive ability. You know, Penny Hardaway compared him to Alex Lomax after the second exhibition. You're like, what? Isn't that a little bit far in terms of Alo's ability to jump passing lanes and strip guys and kind of get offense going with that? But you saw a little bit of that last night with Young, where he picked that one guy's pocket late in the first half. Memphis needs a spark, comes down, throws down a hammer left-handed dunk that has the crowd excited again. So I think he has that ability to where, hey, we need a spark. You put Jalen Young in and he can kind of change things there. But I'd like to see, like you alluded to, Young running the show a little bit more, right? For longer stretches and kind of getting guys involved in that regard, which we just haven't seen yet.
Penny's going to use that Alo comparison with point guards for the next 20 years. That is always going to happen. One thing I didn't like that we talked about briefly was with the turnovers. We saw a couple of times when Memphis got a rebound or got a strip, a turnover, and I don't want to pinpoint one guy, but Jaquan Walton is trying to lead the break, but he's really trying to go all the way. He's trying to finish at the end, right? He's trying to go. You have to give that ball up. You are not a point guard. And you saw 2 different times when he did this. You know the plays I'm talking about. The ball got knocked away from him from behind, and it was a turnover. Memphis turned it right back. This is when you have to – breakaways are one thing, 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, but you're going against 3 defenders. Maybe you got a 2-on-3, and Jaquan's trying to go the distance. Slow it down. Give it to your point guard. Set up the half-court offense. Everything doesn't have to be frantic.
Agreed. And I think we saw the same thing with David Jones, where he would, grab that long rebound off a 3-point miss or whatever and try to go coast to coast, oftentimes dribbling into traffic or, dribbling nearly out of bounds. But something else that also we saw a lot, I thought, was just the Hail Mary type outlet passes that would just dribble out of bounds or dribble into a defender. I think we saw at least 2 or 3 of those, if I'm not mistaken. So the first half, they were playing at 120 miles per hour to the point where their minds could not keep up, right, with their bodies. Second half, you saw more half-court sets. You saw kind of deliberate effort, rather, to feed the ball inside to guys like Jordan Brown, Malcolm Dandridge, and others.
Football, we often talk about the improvement that a team shows from game 1 to game 2. That's when you can really gauge a team. We don't normally talk about that with basketball because of the level of competition. You might be playing a great team to start or a great team in your second game. In this situation, Memphis played a very competitive Jackson State team, but now they step up. I'm not saying Missouri's a Final Four team, but playing Missouri in Columbia is awfully tough. I did a game years ago when Memphis traveled to Columbia, and that fan base, those students, are incredibly tough on opponents. It will be a challenge Friday night. What are your expectations after this first game for Memphis to go into Columbia, Missouri, and try to pull off a win against the Missouri Tigers?
Well, I'll start by saying this. When I put out my preseason prediction story where I kind of prognosticated the season and looked at kind of game by game, Missouri is one of the losses that I had in non-conference play. I have the Tigers going, Memphis Tigers rather, going 9-4 through their 13-game non-conference slate, with Missouri being one of the losses, with Texas A&M on the road being a loss, Virginia at home also in that mix, and then one game in the Bahamas for the battle for Atlantis.
Okay.
So I think this is a game, it's so early, and in my opinion, nothing we saw last night, at least for me, inspires confidence that they're going to go on the road in that tough environment, like you said, SEC opponent, and get a win without Penny Hardaway. I think this is one they may drop.
So it doesn't change your mind. You think there's really that much of a difference, though, in Rick Stansbury, a veteran head coach, running Penny's system as opposed to just Penny being there physically?
Maybe, maybe not. I think, I'm sure Penny feels this way, right? When we ask him tomorrow, we'll find out more. But I'm sure there's times in game situations or, substitutions or the way he handles kind of minuscule things that tend to add up that are different, right? Every coach is different. So I think that's a factor. We don't know, the guys' relationship with Rick Stansbury. I'm not saying that there's not a good one there, but, you just don't know that dynamic, right? And I think those things do tend to matter.
I don't know much about Missouri's roster. You know a lot more than I do, but I did see the news that Connor Vanover, the 7'5" center, who has bounced around a lot in his collegiate career.
One-time Memphis commit.
I remember him fondly about his great time in Memphis, which never materialized. I'm just kidding about that. But he is not going to be playing in this game. He's going to be out. So
Yes.
I don't know how much of a part he is of this team. Is he a backup? Is he a starter? And what can you tell us about Missouri and what Memphis will be facing?
Yeah, I don't think he was going to play a huge role, but this is a guy who they got in the portal from Oral Roberts who averaged, 13 points, roughly 7 rebounds, and he's 7'3", right?
Pretty good number.
That's what it comes down to. The guy's 7'3".
Yeah,
Obviously,
I thought he was 7'5", but it's still going to be taller than most players in college basketball.
just his presence alone, I think, could be a game changer and kind of could offset some of the things that Jordan Brown and Malcolm Dandridge and Nick Jourdain could do down low.
True.
Now you don't have that guy. Like, forget the offensive production, right? Because he put up those numbers in the Summit League. I don't know how that translates to SEC basketball, whatever. But just having that big body down low, now they don't have that, could be a hit. But then again, that's not one of your, in my opinion, one of their top 5-6 rotation guys. So, it's not really a significant blow either, if that makes sense.
Memphis, they want to push it. They want to get transition baskets.
Yep.
They want to go up and down. They want to play smothering defense and score easy buckets off that.
Missouri does not want to do that.
Missouri doesn't want to do that. But Memphis has a back-to-the-basket center. And really, two of them almost when you think of Malco. But Malco's more up and down than Jordan Brown is. But Jordan Brown is a traditional, old-school
Throwback
center. He's a throwback. There are not too many of them.
Yep.
Do you think Memphis should, at times in games, play through him and not be so concerned about pushing it and getting a little bit out of rhythm? Throw it down to the big man. I guess it would all depend on matchups, but throw it down to the big man. Let him do his thing inside the paint. And when he's doubled or he has nowhere to go, just kick it to one of those three-point shooters.
Yeah, I think so. I think we saw more of that in the second half, like we just talked about.
We did.
Memphis had 6 fast break points in that second half. That's not something you see, right, with a Penny Hardaway team. You see, like you said, you see track meets. You see them getting up and down the court. But I think it'd be wise to not come out like you've been fired out of a cannon, right, like you did last night, and to kind of be slower, a little bit more deliberate, maybe run some half-court sets and look inside first and have that open up your outside. Because how many times did we see that last night when they got the ball down to Jordan Brown in the second half? Guys would collapse. That 2-3 zone, would collapse, and it would open up shooters like David Jones or Jaquan Walton or even at times Javon Quinn. I think that's how you need to play against Missouri until you kind of settle in.
Just for the record, we're talking about the Monday night game because you may be checking out this podcast on Wednesday or Thursday. So, of course, it was the Monday opener against Jackson State. Final thoughts as far as what you saw in game 1 leading into game 2, and what are your expectations? Again, you had them picked as a loss at Missouri. That hasn't changed from what you saw on Monday night, but just overall, there's a lot of anticipation for this team. They have the components. And so, again, after the first game, some good, some bad. Yeah,
no need to ring the alarm just yet. Obviously, we've gotten through one day, one game of the 23-24 season. But, this team doesn't have the luxury of, kind of building momentum and getting it together in January or February.
Right on, my friend. You're right on.
Even the limited luxury last year's team had, right, with Kendrick Davis and DeAndre Williams and that whole squad, they don't even have that. Like, that margin has even thinned from last year because, you've got opportunities coming up here with Michigan, Arkansas, or Stanford, right? Second game of the battle for Atlantis, then, possibly UNC, Villanova, Texas Tech. Those are all top 60 Ken Pom teams. Then you come back in December, right? And you're playing Clemson, Virginia, Texas A&M. Once again, all top 60 Ken Pom teams. But that is it, right? Like, once January 1st comes around, you've got 2 opportunities.
Florida
good wins.
Atlantic.
And then you're,
Yep.
and that's with fingers crossed, toes crossed that FAU holds up and can do what they're expected to do, what they're predicted to do. If that doesn't happen, you've got 0, right? So what they do between now and December 31st is going to, make or break their tournament resume. And I think that's the part that's concerning.
Parth, you're spot on. Against Florida Atlantic, even the home game against Florida Atlantic, you'll be expected to win because you're on your home court. There's one quality game that you can get in that conference is beating Florida Atlantic and Boca Raton, assuming, again, they are the Florida Atlantic that we saw last year. Other than that, the conference only hurts you. It does not help you. Final question. Do you expect the same starting 5 that we saw Monday night starting in Friday's game at Missouri?
I do not. And we'll ask Penny Hardaway about that on Wednesday, tomorrow. But I do think my assumption might be spot on in terms of starting Malcolm Dandridge, starting Nick Jourdain to kind of light a fire under those 2 guys that were on the bench, those 2 guys being Jordan Brown and Caleb Mills. I think message received, and I think we'll kind of revert back to the expected starting 5, which is obviously Javon Quinterly, Caleb Mills, Jaquan Walton, David Jones, and Jordan Brown against Missouri.
We will get a much better picture of this team
No doubt.
next week when we talk after what we see on Friday night against Missouri. Great stuff, Parth.
Appreciate you.
That is Parth Upadhyaya. He's the Tigers basketball beat writer for the Daily Memphian. And this has been the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston. Be sure to check out our other podcasts, the Daily Memphian's Food Podcast, Sound Bites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies podcast, also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hill. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. We'll talk to you next week.